to be here tonight. It's an fortunate event that we have, because we're here to tell you about what may happen or what will happen in terms of flooding after the Waldo Canyon Fire. And we wish the fire wouldn't have taken place, but now that it has, it's important for us to let you know what's in store going forward, and to bring in some really very knowledgeable speakers about what's going to happen if we get some of these big rainstorms coming along in the spring, and how you can better prepare yourselves. I'm going to go ahead and introduce now Patty Baxter with our Sheriff's Office, Office of Emergency Management. And Patty's going to talk a little bit about what the risk is and the reality of flooding, and then the mitigation efforts that are already underway.
As you all know, flood and fire is not new to this region or El Paso County. What is new is the risk that's coming off the burn scar. And last July 30th, I think this area got a pretty good taste of what the burn scar's potential will be. If you just go outside the school, you can see a good example. And that was about a ½ inch of rain in an hour. ½ inch an hour in just, I believe 3 watersheds. We have 26 watersheds that are affected by the burn scar. I do want to tell you there are 2 assessments that are going on right now. A watershed assessment that is a real hard look at the burn scar and the effects. And Steve Sanchez from the Forest Service will talk about that one. The second one is the one that I am working very hard on. The first product we're going to have the end of April, and it's a rough cut map of what we think the new inundation area will look like. Right now we're basing everything on the 100-year floodplain that FEMA has, and you can see it on the map over there. The blue is a FEMA 100-year floodplain. Well, the FEMA plan doesn't account for burn scar, and it doesn't account for debris. So we know there's going to be a large amount of water and stuff coming off the burn scar, but once it leaves the base of the canyon, we're not sure where it goes, how fast it goes, how high the water will be, and where the debris will settle. And that's what this study will do for us. The end of this month, we'll have the first rough cut map, and it will be based upon what we consider to be the new 10-year storm. By July, I'm going to have maps that will cover all the watersheds on Fountain Creek. And it'll be based on a ½ inch of rain, 3/4, 1 inch, 1 1/2, and 2 inches of rain in 1 hour. So you may find at ½ inch of rain, your house and you may be fairly safe, but at an inch of rain, you may be in danger. That will all be made public as soon as we get it completed. What we have found out of the initial data that we have this engineering company, hydrology company doing is, generally speaking, you're going to be looking at 6 times the amount of water and stuff, debris, trees, rocks coming out of off the burn scar than what you're normally used to. And in some cases, some watersheds will produce more than others. Sand, which is above the school here, Wellington, which is above the Lone Dunk Campground, in Waldo, all those are large watersheds that were very severely burnt and are going to produce with an inch of rain, a significant amount of debris. One of the things, and I'll talk a little bit later about methods for notification, is that we have discovered also, and this came from our various events that we had last year, is generally speaking it takes about 30 minutes for water in the upper areas of these watersheds to reach the bottom of the canyons. So in essence, once the water starts, or the rain starts falling, we have about 30 minutes, or you have about 30 minutes, if you wait till then, to realize what it is you need to do, either move up in your house or move out of your house for the flooding. We've also discovered we continue to get water and debris out of the watersheds up to 2 and 3 hours after the rain has stopped. So when we send out a National Weather Service warning, and we send out the emergency notification, commonly called reverse 911, it'll stop raining, and we're not going to have you necessarily suggest you return to your homes until several hours after the rain has stopped. What I'll put on the slide here is understanding your risks. And I don't want to go into details on each watershed where you live. I would rather do that one-on-one. Except to say that if you live on the north side of 24, you're at a high risk. If you live on Fountain Creek, especially within the 100-year floodplain, and that's what we're using now because we don't have any other method to use. If you're in that 100-year floodplain, you are at high risk. We firmly believe that when the inundation map is done, it will exceed the 100-year floodplain. So those that may be outside the 100-year floodplain and you think you might be safe, you may not be. I won't know, we won't know until later this month. The important thing for you is, have a plan and understand where safe is. Is safe on the second floor of your home, or is safe leaving your home and going to Woodland Park for the day? I'm sure they would love you to come up there and spend money. But it's have a plan for you and your family. And if you have kids that you work in Colorado Springs and your kids are home, make sure your kids understand what that plan is. The second point on your plan is understand where safe is. In some cases, it may be completely out of the area. In some cases, it may be just on the other side of Highway 24. Once you have that plan, I would suggest practicing it. Practice getting together, especially if your family is working and located in different places during the day. Make sure you understand where you're all going to meet to get together so you can account for each other. The last thing on the risk, not to add bad news on top of bad news, we're actually drier right now than we were before the Waldo Canyon Fire. Even with the snowstorms that we have gotten and the one we're getting tomorrow, it still will only temporarily, for a very short period of time, reduce the fire hazard. So unfortunately, on the north side of 24, we have a very severe and dangerous flooding. And on the south side of Highway 24, we're still in a very high fire danger. On May 11th at the Cascade Library, there's going to be a class there on FireWise, as well as flood and debris preparedness. And that class, it'll be an hour and a half. It starts at 10:30. And they're going to go in more details on how to prepare yourself for flooding and FireWise mitigation. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to cut all your trees down. It's a smart way to protect your home from fire. Hang on, I just want to advance my slides here. So on the how do you get notified that there's a problem? First, you have the National Weather Service. They have radios, weather alert radios. If you don't have one, I highly encourage you to get one. They have a loud, obnoxious squeal that it's really hard to sleep through even in the middle of the night. For those that are very hard of hearing or deaf, you can get the models that have a bed shaker or a strobe, so that if you think you might sleep through that obnoxious squeal of an alarm, it has a bed shaker designed to shake the bed and wake you up, as well as a strobe that can go off in your house. So there's multiple ways, either if you're hearing or you're not hearing, that you can get these alerts. If you have the new iPhones, you will automatically be getting these alerts as well. Some probably got one today. If you have the new iPhones, you got one today talking about the blizzard warning that we have. If you have the older model phone, you don't get those. The second thing is commonly called the reverse 911. I know some people said it didn't work during the Waldo fire. That was based on the number of telephone calls that the system was required to make. We've changed our system and we have a priority 1 and a priority 2 system. If you live on the north side of 24, if you live on Fountain Creek, anywhere near the 100-year floodplain, you're a priority 1 to get that reverse 911 for flooding. So if you live way up on the side of the mountain and are nowhere near the flooding area, your reverse 911 phone call will come later. It's suggested, though, and highly recommended, that if you do hear flooding in the area and you live on the south side of 24 above the floodplain, just stay in your home. Don't drive into a flood. TV and radio. I would suggest that it's time to get really smart on weather. And that means the 9 o'clock or the 10 o'clock news every night, the weather report. You need to make it your job each night to understand what is the weather in the next day, what's it going to do, and how important it is going to be for watch and know what to do based upon the weather report. I have to deal with commercial phone systems to get alerts out to you, the TV and the radio stations. If you think you're in danger, common sense says get up or out. Don't wait for us to tell you that. The last one is the USGS Water Alert System. If you're not familiar with this, I use this as part of my emergency management job. I use this system here to help me determine whether or not to send out that reverse 911 message. And there are 5 gauges that are in the burn scar. These are gauges that are accessible to anyone through the internet. If you go to this website, and this information is back at the table, you can register to get alerts. When you go in and you make your way through the system, and it's going to ask, what do you want to set your alert at? I suggest a 1/4 inch of rain in an hour. And what this system will do is, when that gauge has received a 1/4 inch of rain, and that's what you've set, it's going to send an email to you or a text to your phone to say, this is just tripped. And what that is a 1/4 inch an hour, it's kind of a wake-up call to start monitoring and thinking about leaving your home and getting to a safe area. The last thing, I don't want to do anything, common sense and taking responsibility for your own safety and evacuation is the absolute critical thing. You'd be amazed at how many phone calls I get from people that have told me, the fire is, close to my house, when are you going to tell me to leave? Or the water is almost to the bank of Fountain Creek behind my house, when are you going to tell me to leave? And like I say, I'm at the mercy of TV stations, how quickly they can get messages out, as well as the phone system on that reverse 911. But common sense tells you, if the water is almost cresting the bank of the river, or the creek, it's time to leave. So use common sense and use your own smart mountain common sense to know what you need to do and when you need to do it. Final thing, remember how California has earthquakes. They've had earthquakes forever, earthquakes quite frequently. People still live there, they still spend their money there, they still vacation there. They have just learned to deal with that particular effects of Mother Nature. We need to do the same here. Have a plan, if something happens, know what it takes to recover very quickly, and try to have a normal life as best you can, considering what we will have to deal with in the next 10 years.
One of the things I did quickly want to mention too, and Patty touched on it, when you go to the 911 authority, register your phone for text, because text can be sent out much more quickly than a phone call that has to wait for an answering machine or voicemail to pick up. So make sure you register your text. If you can get text on your phone, that's even better. And also, if you want to register your email, they can also send out emails. So that's another thing that's available. So now I'm going to introduce Teresa Springer, and she's with the Coalition for the Upper South Platte, and she's going to talk about mitigation efforts in the future.
What we do when we look at a fire is our focus starts out very direct. We're looking at lives and what we can do to buy time on a house to get you out, and then we look at the really big picture. We do a lot of different types of mitigation. These prescriptions, you've seen some of the sandbags, that's what I was doing today, gabion baskets, putting trees down on the hill slopes, digging them in so it slows down some of that water. We do seeding, the wattles. There's a large amount we do. You're going to be seeing us doing more of these trap bags real soon, putting in some Jersey barriers. We've just been waiting for the ground to thaw. Some of the things that we're looking at, we've done a lot of studies walking down Fountain Creek, starting at the school here and ending up down at the wines of Colorado. And our focus there is there's things that can be done. We don't want to force anybody to do anything, but we'd like to fund some of that. And those release of what we're going to do, we will get that out to you as we know more of what we need to do. I think some of you probably seen the gang of us that have walked down that thing. we're looking at these houses that are in the blue and seeing if anything we can do. And you know, I mean, Patty really said it well. If you're on the low side of the creek, leave early. If you're on the high side of the creek, you got a little more time. And think of that when you go there. The creek may have never come over before, but it's going to do it now. We have a website, waldofire.org, and on that website there's a forum. And if you go in, there's a little button you can click. I think it's a leaf at the top. Click on that. Find where you live, because we're going to break it into different sections, because what's happening over in Mountain Shadows does not necessarily mean what's happening here. You can put your questions in there, comments. We will be monitoring that, so you know, somebody's selling a soft drink, we're going to boot you off the thing. You do have to sign up and say where you're at. We got to make sure you're legitimate. We had the website up for about an hour and had a couple of hits already. The first one was from Poland, so that's why you guys... Yeah, that's why you got to tell us who you are and what you're doing. As I said, a lot of people think we come in here and our focus is to save your house. I would dearly love to save everybody's home. I'm buying you time. That's what I'm getting you, is time to get out. And if you got a house to come back to, be thankful. I think I'm going to leave it at that and get this thing growing.
Next, I'd like to call on Steve Sanchez from the U.S. Forest Service to give us some information on the watershed assessment, otherwise known as WARS.
We narrowed down this presentation just to meet this group's needs, and I'm going to try not to repeat anything that's been said, and then I'll try to cover a couple more things. One of the things that was originally talked about was this WARS assessment, and you heard Patty talking about it. The WARS assessment is basically, it's a sediment supply and delivery study. It's a way for us to try to calculate and predict the amount of sediment and debris and water that is going to come off the hill slopes. So this first slide, and this presentation is fairly short too. That way I'll be around afterwards to answer questions on a more personal level. There's about 4 watersheds upstream and about 3 downstream. I can't remember all by name, that are of concern here. It depends on where you sit. Some of the watersheds you live at the toe, some of the watersheds you live above. If you live like upstream of some of the watersheds, you might not have a threat from debris, water, or sediment flows. But if Highway 24 closes, there might be another issue you got to deal with. So, you know, in terms of planning for that, that's one thing you want to do. What the WARS assessment did is it looked at, there's 112, we expanded the number of total watersheds within the Waldo burn area. There's 112. Of those 112, there's approximately 90 that are going to need treatment. Of those 90, there's a portion that runs along Highway 24 that need treatment. And the way we determined that is we looked at the soil burn severity. If you remember the last presentation we gave here, the soil burn severity, the high is in red. You can't see the green too well, and then the yellows. But what the slide mostly tells you is most of the watersheds that are affecting this area here are in the high to moderate soil burn severity, which means that they're going to act very, very bad when it rains. Next slide, please. We went in and we calculated. I know you can't see it from here, but I just want you to know that this was a considerable effort. We've gone in and we've calculated, predicted the amount of sediment coming off of each one of these watersheds. And it predicted, you know, coming from ranges of 0 to 100, you know, however many tons. But we've gone through each and every watershed and have predicted the amount of sediment, debris, and water that will be coming off in a 2-year rainfall event. Next slide, please. This slide here, you can tell, you're looking from the top of the hill, looking down. This is what's coming your way. This is just from one of the rainfall events we had. It's mud that's been collecting sediment. And each and every one of the watersheds, each and every one of these little tiny draws has stuff like this staging that's, you know, working its way down the hill and will release at some point. Gravity will make it release. Next slide, please. Just a quick pic of the moderate to high soil burn severity, just the slopes. There's no living vegetation up in many of these areas. It's completely nuked. Next slide. Another one rainstorm event. This is an active one. It's actively still cutting. So you can see all this material that probably was from here down to there is now down in Fountain Creek. And for the entire length of this watershed. So just tons and tons of sediment coming. Next, please. This is one of the smaller watersheds after a rainfall event. It just released at the lower end. Go ahead. I believe this was one in Sand Gulch, or one area near Sand Gulch. And this pic here, okay, so what the WARS assessment is giving us is the predictions for the amount of material, right? I know I'm repeating myself. The amount of water, sediment, and debris that's coming down. And then we have to design different types of treatment. So that part is the part we're in right now of the WARS assessment. So that's why we're not ready to release that information. We need to do these designs and then concur that, yeah, this is a solid game plan for the entire burn area. And it's not, we're not going to be able to do it in 1 year. We're not going to be able to do it in 2 or 3 years. It's going to take many years. No matter how much money and stuff, it's going to take a while just because there's limited workforce, there's limited time to work. So just be prepared. And we're as Sally had alluded to, this is a very unified approach. So it may seem like at times like nothing's being done, but a considerable amount of effort's being done to make sure that we're all working collectively, all the agencies, all the government branches, the volunteer organizations, we're all just working so closely together to come up with some solid game plans. When we finish the WARS assessment, when the WARS assessment is finished, there's another process we're already working on right now. It's a priority process where we figure out, okay, what are the highest priority areas that need treatment? And you can imagine that's pretty complicated. It's based on science, on the predictive models, and it's also based on human health, primarily human health and welfare. It's based on the values at risk, you know, the barns, the houses, the castles, things like that, the water delivery systems. So we have to go through this exercise collectively and unified approach and say, okay, this is what we're going to do year 1, this is our plan, year 2, year 3, we're going to do the best we possibly can. And I just want you to be clear that we're together on this and that it's going to take time and we're not going to hit it all in 1 year or 2 or 3 years. These are detention basins, so they're big holes that we kind of dig out of the ground, but they're anchored in with what's called seal logs that are anchored into the stream channel so they won't wash out. They're in a series of stages from upper to middle to lower. So they last several years. The upper fills up, of course, with sediment first, the middle and lower. This particular one, that upper had filled up with sediment first, and it's already has vegetation pretty well established. It looks really nice. Next slide. Yeah, another type of design we do is some of these channels, they've lost their functionality. They can't function. They can't move water and sediment through like they used to. So we go in and rebuild them so that when a big rainfall event comes down the hill, that energy is dissipated and spread out over the entire floodplain, and it reduces that wear and tear on the earth. And so it gives us a little bit more time. You know, we hear about buying time to get out of harm's way. This is one of the ways we're doing it. It's going to drop that kinetic energy. It's going to drop that load out in the upper parts. By the time it gets to this lower part of the watershed, it has a little less energy, but it's not a complete fix. Okay, that's it for my slides. And again, I wanted to be available and to answer questions personally at the end, so I didn't put together a great long speech. I just want you to know that we are working collectively. we're together on this. There's the WARS assessment. It's a complicated process to estimate the amount of sediment, debris, and water coming off 112 watersheds, and then to plan, to engineer treatments on all those, and then to figure out what the priority is collectively to make sure that we're doing this in the best manner possible. Thank you.
I'd like to now call on our county engineer, Andre Bracken, to just kind of update you on some of the things that are going on in El Paso County as it relates to some of the projects. So, Andre?
Let me just start out with what El Paso County Public Services has been doing since the fire last year. We concentrated on all the conveyances, basically all of the channels, culverts, everything that conveys stormwater. And my direction to the staff has been to pay a lot more attention on cleaning out and keeping all those conveyances cleaned out. Because the last thing we want is to have locations where you got logs and that kind of thing that causes a bigger problem. When we do have big storms and you have the sediment coming down, if those conveyances are already cleaned out, if we can keep those clean, it's going to ensure that you've got a lot less issues up in the basin around homes, public roads, bridges, and all that, if we keep those clean first. So that's what we're doing within the county. The EWP program, if I could just talk about that for a little bit, is funds that are made available through the federal government, through USDA, through our Natural Resource Conservation Service, to work on private properties. The funding that you may have heard about in the news lately is that funding. There's about another $7.2 million for the Waldo Canyon area that we can use to reimburse private property owners for the work they do on their property. Now, as you may guess, you know, as a property owner, you're thinking, well, what am I supposed to do here? I don't have the technical expertise, but we do have a lot of citizens groups. We have a technical people within the state and the county to assist. So what we've been doing is putting together projects that we can get this funding connected to. Projects such as, the first one that we actually did was here on this school site. Again, the EWP funds cannot be spent on federal lands. So they can't be spent up in the forest area. It's all U.S. Forest Service. But as you go downstream in these drainage ways, there's additional work to be done. And most of that is on private property. There are not easements here that we can work in. Yes, we work on the roads and bridges where the streams cross, but we don't have the easements on private property for the most part where these streams are. So that's where the EWP reimbursement funds will be utilized, is the county and city and the others involved here working with property owners to do these projects, these structures that Steve Sanchez spoke of, to get those in place. And what those will do is help to restrict or slow down the movement of the sediment as it comes down the hillsides. That's our biggest concern, is that, you know, we've always had concerns about flooding in the region and Highway 24 getting flooded. Now it's a lot worse, as you've probably learned and heard a lot about, with as the fire has basically denuded all the undergrowth, all of the vegetation that was there to hold back sediment and restrict flow. Now you've got a situation where even though in a storm you're not going to see a great increase in the volume of runoff, but what's going to happen is that runoff is going to go a lot faster. So at critical points you're going to see flooding occur with even smaller rainstorms than you did before. So back to, we have to keep the conveyances clear and open. So we're checking those on a regular basis through the pass, and then combined with the projects that we have planned on private properties. That's kind of the game plan there on the county side. I'll talk a little bit about the state projects. CDOT has 4 critical areas they're looking at on Highway 24 that they have funds. I believe that they were able to put together a little over $4 million for projects in the Ute Pass Highway 24 area. The first most critical one of those is Rainbow Falls. Actually, if you're heading eastbound on Highway 24, on the right side of the road there's a fairly steep slope that drops off towards Fountain Creek. That slope basically has started failing, and the big project there is to stabilize that slope. In a big storm, that is one location where CDOT is concerned you could lose the highway because of the slope instability right there. So that's their #1 project that they're actually designing right now, and they'll have a contractor on probably within the next month to 2 months. Another one is in the Cascade area. There's a fairly large culvert that they're going to, a new culvert they're going to put in. It's a 42-inch that'll go underneath all 4 lanes of Highway 24 that will help to relieve a drainage problem that's been there for a long time. But again, with our increased concern and more runoff, it's greatly needed. So you'll see that going in. And in 2 other areas, the Sand Gulch, which is this culvert or the drainage way here beside the school, that culvert on Highway 24 was completely plugged in the storm. And what they're going to do there is some inlet work and outlet work on that culvert. On the inlet side, on the upstream side, they're going to build a sediment basin there that'll help to collect sediment before it continues to run downstream. Then on the outlet here, right almost near the school, you can see it, they're going to build put in some rock riprap and basically stabilize that better there. Another location they're going to work on is Wellington Gulch, both upstream and downstream of that culvert. They're going to put a device on the inlet side of that culvert that will basically help to trap trees and vegetation and sediment and before it continues downstream. So CDOT's doing a lot here. With the EWP program, the challenge we have immediately is that there is a deadline or a timeline on this money. We've got about $10 million to spend in about 9 months. So that's a lot of planning, a lot of design, a lot of clearances. Just a lot has to happen in a short time frame in order to spend the $10 million that our elected officials work so hard to get for the region. So that's our big challenge. Let's see, at this point, I guess I'd mention clearances. With that federal money comes some red tape, I'd call it. There's a thing called NEPA, Natural Environmental Policy Act. We have to follow that with any kind of federal funds, which means that there's various levels of clearances that has to happen on your private properties that we're going to work on before we can do any work. And right now we're waiting on clearances for a number of those locations. Once we get that, you may see some of the work starting to happen. One of the EWP projects we're talking about now is the potential to do some more aerial mulching on private properties. The Forest Service did a little over 3,000 acres of aerial mulching in the Forest Service area not long after the fire was contained. You all may have seen helicopters dropping the mulch and the material down. We're looking at probably doing some of that on some of these large acreage properties that will go a long way, that the Forest Service could not do because it was private property. So that's probably about $1 million effort right there for our EWP monies. Another EWP project we're moving on is a sediment basin that's immediately above Rainbow Falls, and that one we're just getting into design on right now. With the federal funds that have been made available, that's basically 75-25 money, we call it. So it's the expectation is the sponsor, El Paso County, Manitou Springs, Green Mountain Falls in this case, has to come up with a 25% match for that funding. For the most part, we're seeing that a lot of that match can be made up with in-kind work. In other words, my engineers or construction managers and work that the property owners do on their own can be identified as value to make up that 25% match. So for the most part, we think we have a lot of the match covered, but we don't think we have it all covered. So we're having to look elsewhere for other sponsored, interested parties, folks that will donate to help make that 25% match. Commissioner Clark.
Thanks, Andre. Now I'd like to call on Jennifer Stark from the National Weather Service.
I just want to tell you a little bit about what our office is doing to issue timely flash flood warnings for the Waldo Canyon burn scar and surrounding areas. Go ahead and next slide. We know that flooding is not new to the area. What is the definition of a 100-year flood? Some people think that it's a flood that only happens every 100 years, but really what the definition is that it's a 1% chance every year of a flood of that magnitude occurring. With the burn scar, the Bear team that did the hydrology study, they used a 10-year rainfall rate or 10-year storm of 1.75 inches, and that's not a lot. So we have had historical cases of flooding, and you can see in Memorial Day of 1935 over 7 inches of rain in 2 days. Go ahead, next slide. And this is the result of that. A lot of flooding on Monument and Fountain Creeks. People were killed, a lot of infrastructure damaged, and probably not a lot of warning at that time. Next slide. And here's some photographs. I think that was on Bijou Street. Next slide. Okay, next slide. And then 1965, 3 days of moderate to heavy rainfall across all of eastern Colorado, several lives lost, $500 million in damage. Next slide. 1999, how many people were here for that event? Okay, several of you, I was not, but $30 million in damage, 10 to 14 inches of rain, and I believe that also fell on melting snow because that occurred in April. Next slide. And a lot of damage with that. A lot of bridges washed out on Fountain Creek and raw sewage dumping into Fountain Creek. Next slide. And here's some photographs from that event. Okay. And I just want to tell you too that even though we're in the middle of a 3-year drought, this is the 3rd year of the drought, that in 2010, I live in El Paso County, I measured 5.1 inches of rainfall in my house in about 6 hours. So even in the middle of the drought, that does not mean that we're not going to have significant rainfall. And if it's localized over the burn scar, we're in trouble. So we're watching the burn scar very closely. Go ahead. And we're learning as much as we can in my office about the burn scar, how each of the basins is going to react, how it's going to impact areas downstream. The studies that are being conducted will really help our office, but we're actually learning with every rainfall event that we have. And what are we doing? We're trying to work with other agencies. We started July 3rd and met with the Bear team, many other agencies, and started planning. Of course, last year, those meetings were coincident with the start of the monsoon season. So the monsoon season is when we have a lot of subtropical moisture moving up into the desert Southwest. Historical flooding in the southwestern U.S. and the western U.S. often occurs in the monsoon season because we have deep layers of moisture in the atmosphere. Any thunderstorms that develop can tap into that moisture. The monsoon season is July through September. But in the springtime, you know, if we get one thunderstorm that forms over the burn scar and sits and rains, we can still have flooding, so keep that in mind. We set our rainfall rate at a ½ inch per hour to issue a flash flood warning. So if we have thunderstorms that are producing that much rainfall, we're going to issue a flash flood warning. That's a very low threshold, so there may be times where your perception of that warning is that it was a false alarm. We're also issuing other products to let you know that we're having light amounts of rainfall on the burn scar. So a significant weather advisory when we have up to 2/10 of an inch of rain per hour on the burn scar. We may say at this time we're not concerned about flooding, these storms are moving off. If we have a series of storms move through, we may raise awareness by issuing a flood advisory. So 2/10 up to that half inch per hour rainfall rate. Next slide. And then the flash flood warning will be triggered at a half inch rainfall rate per hour or more. So we're not waiting until we have a half inch of rainfall on the burn scar. We're looking for thunderstorms that are producing that much rain. So debris flows have reached roads and structures well after the rain has stopped, as Patty said. We may keep that flash flood warning going for a few hours beyond the rain. So don't be fooled. Next slide. And here's a few pictures of some of those culverts that we talked about under Highway 24 that are undersized. And this one's near Lone Duck Campground. It was about 2/3 full with debris and water on July 30th. Next one. Basin C, a very small watershed, 220 acres. It's a big trouble spot. That's looking down onto Cascade. And another very small watershed, 650 acres, but it's steep and burned very severely. There's another small culvert under Highway 24 that drains Waldo Canyon, which is 1,100 acres. Next slide. And Williams Creek, 1,200 acres, joins Fountain Creek in the heart of Manitou Springs. So we have kind of the confluence there of a couple of creeks. Williams Creek coming into Fountain Creek right in Manitou Springs. Next one. So July 30th, 2012, the most rain we've had so far in the burn scar. I was at work that night and watched the thunderstorms develop. We had a few that moved over the western side of the burn scar, then a few more developed. So the rain did not all come at once. It was about 4 hours of separate storms forming and moving across the burn scar. When we were issuing warnings, we tried to be specific at first, which basin, where it would be impacted. We ended up issuing a flash flood warning for the entire burn scar. Really, the burn scar is not that big. It's 18,000 acres. Very, very difficult to forecast for a small part of that burn scar. Next one. So, again, July 30th and July 30th. I really want to point this out to you that we had a flash flood warning out and there was a lot of damage done to Colorado Springs Utilities infrastructure. Not a lot of damage or impact to people living in and around the burn scar, so that may have given people a false impression that nothing was going to happen. But really, we didn't have that much rain, about 1 3/4 to maybe 2 inches of rain in that event. So we're going to be issuing those flash flood warnings anytime we feel that it's necessary. Next one. How are we doing that? How are we estimating how much rain is falling? Well, our Doppler radar, which is down in Pueblo, and it just went through a major upgrade, and you probably heard about this. It happened all across the country. We now have dual pole Doppler radar, and the dual pole upgrade is really the most significant technology improvement that we've had in Doppler radar since they were deployed probably in the mid-90s. And it's going to help us quite a bit with rainfall estimation, and we hope to see that come into play this year and in years to come. But the radar estimates how much rain is falling from thunderstorms. And then also we're looking at real-time reports. So the USGS gauges, people that have rain gauges, and we're getting reports back from emergency management and law enforcement that something's occurring. This stream or this pour point is being impacted. So when we know that, we're going to issue a warning. Next one. On September 12th, we issued a flash flood warning, and that probably was a real false alarm. We were very concerned because we were forecasting a long duration stratiform rainfall event. So a light rain, maybe some drizzle, lasting several hours. We had very little or no flooding at all, no debris coming down, and what we learned from that, it's about the rainfall rate. And typically we're going to see those increased rainfall rates from thunderstorms, not from stratiform rain. So just like all of you, we're still learning how this is going to impact the area. Next one. And you can see some of the rainfall amounts. It's a little hard to see, but in the September 12th event, we had up to about 1.5 inches of rain over the burn scar, parts of the burn scar. Next one. So we ask people to give us reports. We have spotters in the area. They've been very, very good about giving us rain gauge reports, but we also need to hear about street flooding, debris flows, things like that. But if you're in imminent danger, your first responsibility is to get to safety. Patty can relay reports to us, and her office can send those to us. But when we get those reports, we send them out to the media immediately. We put them in our warnings and statements so people know what's being impacted. We work very closely with our media partners to get the word out to the public. So I want to talk a little bit more about the methods that you can get weather information. Weather radio, Patty talked about that. It's an old technology, but the good thing about the weather radio, it broadcasts only for El Paso and Teller County. And that's the frequency, 162.475 megahertz. You can program your radio to get warnings only for El Paso County. The downside of this is you're going to get warnings that are in eastern El Paso County. But it's still, I think, the only thing that's going to wake you up in the middle of the night. All right? $30 to $50 to have that in your home. Next one. The El Paso, Teller County reverse 911. Patty said your landline's already in there, prioritized by where you live, but register your cell phones. It's really, really important. Most of the time when these rainfall events occur, you're not going to be at home. It's going to be afternoon and evening when most of us are out running around doing things. Next one. Weather call. You may have heard of this service. It's a Colorado company offering free National Weather Service flash flood warnings to residents in the burn scar. Again, a very good service. And it will call you only if you're in the polygon. The alerts that you're getting on your cell phones, that is a government venture, Department of Homeland Security, FCC weather service. It's going to be tornado warnings, flash flood warnings, and blizzard warnings. So the blizzard warnings are a little bit longer fuse. Tornado, flash flood, shorter fuse, minutes to react. And you may not be in the warning polygon when your cell phone activates. It's going to be based on the cell phone tower coverage. But another good method of getting that information. For those of you that are really impacted by the potential for flooding, have as many methods as you need to get that warning information. All right, so I guess I'm about out of time. Okay. I just want to say that as the mitigation work is being done, we expect that there will be some change in our flash flood warning threshold, but it probably won't be for a few years to come. We're prepared to adjust that as needed, but for now, going into our second summer with the burn scar, we're going to keep it that half-inch rainfall rate per hour for our flash flood warning. If you have any comments, questions, concerns about the warnings that we issue, please contact us. I'm very open to feedback, criticism. I'm a weather person. I'm a meteorologist. You can't hurt my feelings. So, next one. And our goal, what we strive for every day, is to have lead time, adequate lead time before there's damage from a severe weather event, be it tornado, hail, flash flooding. The reality of the situation is that we may be only able to give you minutes, especially with the burn scar. It's going to react very quickly. So when we issue that warning, please take it seriously. And, you know, it may seem like a false alarm, but when it actually happens, we'll know that you took action. And as Steve said, that ash and debris are already staging, so it may not take that much rainfall to have it let loose, because we have gravity acting on it. We have water being, the force of water is the greatest force there is, really, on the planet, and it's going to cause that dam to break loose at some point. And here's our web page. We do have a Waldo Canyon burn scar decision support. We activate that when we expect flash flooding on the burn scar. We have radar information. We have the hazardous weather outlook. So if you had been watching the hazardous weather outlook, you would have seen us talking about the blizzard warning or the blizzard potential for a few days now. And we'll be talking about flash flood potential. Next slide. And there's flash flood safety information available online or at our website. And I think this is the last one. So myself, I'm the meteorologist in charge at the Weather Service office in Pueblo, and Tom Magnuson, our warning coordination meteorologist, are available to assist in whatever way we can if you have questions or comments. All right, thank you.
So now I'd like to call on Greg Langer. Previous to Waldo Canyon, I had no idea what NRCS stood for, so now I know it's Natural Resource Conservation Service, and he's going to give us a little bit of an update from NRCS.
Just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on what NRCS does. Typically, we work with agricultural producers. We have a couple of cost share programs that we help these ag producers with their resource concerns. And how we get into the EWP thing is that emergency watershed protection funding is administered through the NRCS agency. It has to be allocated approved by the Congress. And once they do approve it, then it's thrown into our lap, and at that point we drum up sponsors for the EWP program. With this fire, we were fortunate to have the El Paso County, City of Colorado Springs, Green Mountain Falls, Manitou Springs, and even Colorado Springs Utility step in to be sponsors for this program. So when we're talking about the funding, there is $7.2 million coming to this fire for flood mitigation. The 75% for the projects that are done comes directly from NRCS. The 25% match can be in the form of hard cash or in-kind services, which it could be volunteers if you have a church group, school group, just any kind of group that wants to volunteer to help with some of the hill slope treatments, things that can be done. Then as long as they're supervised by a qualified coordinator for those volunteers, then we can count those hours that the volunteers put in as part of that in-kind match for those projects. So one thing that Steve was talking about, using those sediment basins, there's the log erosion barriers, Jersey barriers. One thing we frown on is what we call the mafia blocks. They're the big concrete blocks. They usually get stacked on top of each other. Those in a heavy flood event will just become missiles, so we try to avoid using those. But anyway, that's pretty much our role with the EWP program. We do provide technical assistance and engineering support. A lot of the engineering will be done by the sponsors, but we're here to provide that assistance too if they do need our help. So anyway, I'll be hanging around at the end of the meeting, so if you have any questions, just look me up. Thank you.
So now I'm going to turn it over to Marini, right? Good job.
So I'm here to talk about something completely different than doom and gloom, fortunately for me. But it is about preparedness. And the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has an assessment that is a survey that's called the Community Assessment for Public Health Emergency Response, or otherwise known as CASPR. It is something that has never been done in the state of Colorado. It is a rapid needs assessment, if you want to go to the next slide, that's typically done during or immediately after a crisis to help improve emergency response. So typically you would send people out into the field after a fire, after a flood, tornado, etc., to determine in those areas what needs are not being met of citizens, what things they might need, what types of Do they need medications? Do they need information? Things like that. However, in El Paso County, we are taking this survey in order to be prepared and get information prior to an emergency so that we can determine residents' preparedness and readiness in the event of an emergency, and therefore to help our emergency responders so that they know what level of preparedness people, the population in areas of El Paso County that may be experiencing a flood in the near future, to determine if those people are actually prepared in the ways that they need to be. And if not, we need to be able to educate people on that. Next slide. So about the survey itself, what we did was we selected areas in El Paso County based on maps that we were provided that fall within the 100-year floodplain that are at higher risk now of having a flash flood event. We then are going to be selecting approximately 200 homes within that area that are going to be randomly selected. The surveys will be conducted door to door in person, and for anybody who is participating, those will be anonymous if you're concerned about that. Teams are going to be identified. We're all going to be wearing badges that look identical to what I have on right now, so if you want to look at that. And we're also going to be wearing, just fresh out of the package, shirts that look exactly like this. So if you have concerns about who's knocking on your door on Friday evening or Saturday morning this week. So next slide. So as I said, this Friday in the evening from 5 to 8 p.m. approximately, or on Saturday between 9 and 3, we're going to be having teams going door to door in these areas and taking approximately 15 minutes of people's time, if they're willing, to participate in these surveys. This will be in parts of Cascade or Ute Pass, Manitou Springs, Pleasant Valley, and Old Colorado City, and parts of Mountain Shadows as well. So what are we going to do with the surveys? Well, I actually already touched a little bit on that. We're going to take the information that we gather. We're going to take it and put it all together in a report. We have an epidemiologist on staff who's going to be putting everything together and saying this number of people have households with pets. These number of people have barriers to evacuation, and what are those barriers to evacuation? Are there language barriers? Do people have problems with transportation? Another question we might ask people is, how do they receive their information about an emergency? Is it reverse 911? Is it the television? Is it the radio? So those are just some examples of things that we'll be asking. And then those results will actually, the survey results will be put into that report, and that will be posted on our website, www.elpasocountyhealth.org, in early May. So, oh, one last thing. I was told to bring props. So anybody who participates, whose house is chosen and chooses to participate in the survey, will be receiving one of these bags. It has a flashlight in it. It has a first aid kit in it. It also has a lot of important information about emergency preparedness overall, as well as flash flooding information.
I wanted to mention too that Teresa from CUS mentioned that if they're going to come, if Coalition for the Upper South Platte or volunteer organizations are going to come onto your property to do work, they need to have a license to enter in terms of liability. So they can email that to you, they can get that to you so that you can fill that out. Otherwise, they can't come on your property. So if you're interested in doing that, make sure you get in touch with Teresa's here tonight at the end of the meeting, and or I'm sure you could go to CUSP's website or go to waldocanyonfire.org and get the information. They can email it directly to you. Now I'm going to introduce somebody I've gotten to know over the period of time after the Waldo Canyon Fire, which is Erin May, and she's going to talk about flood insurance and the things that you need to know about flood insurance, what it will and won't cover, the waiting periods that are involved. So Erin, looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
So I thought this was interesting. I was actually in some meetings a couple of weeks ago, and the folks at FEMA who do planning with all the local communities were passing around the El Paso County plan, their emergency plan, emergency mitigation, I think it's called. And at the front of this booklet, or book, big binder actually, was a history of all the disasters in the area. And if you look up there, now obviously I added at the bottom 2012 and I put an asterisk because there may have been other disasters between there. This plan was done in 2008. So I don't know what's in between 2008 and the last year's, but that was definitely a presidentially declared wildfire. And look at how many of those are related to water and how many are related to fire. And maybe this will hit home for all of you, that flooding is the #1 natural disaster worldwide for loss of property and life. #1. I know it's hard to believe here in Colorado, and I know it's hard to believe after the wildfires last year, but there's your statistics. So take a look at that. I think I counted 7 that were related to water and 2 that were related to fire. Okay? And a lot of those were presidential declared disasters. So that's a pretty big event. So why don't we move to the next slide? I'm going to skip over these. I think you guys know most of this, why we've got an increased risk. We had a wildfire, the risk is there. We've got debris issues. The one thing that I want to say that I don't think anybody else in the room really touched on is that, and you probably didn't because you don't know our statistics, but over 20% of our annual premium or claims payouts goes to people who are in low-risk flood zones. So even if you're not in the blue zones, and especially because we have debris issues, water is going to go in places it was never anticipated to go by our map modeling, okay? So you may be sitting in an area, and every year I get a call from somebody who says, I never thought it would happen to me. And I don't want it to be one of you guys in this room. You're in my state. You're in my home state. And this is, I know it's hard to believe, the Colorado floods, but we have claims every single year in this state somewhere. And throughout my presentations, I've got some photos. These are all Colorado photos. So the ways you can go about purchasing flood insurance is go to FloodSmart, find an agent. You can contact your local agent. They can sell flood insurance. They may choose not to, but you can go to floodsmart.gov, and there's a little red box on the right-hand side, and you put in your address, and it'll tell you whether you're in a high-risk or low-risk flood zone. And then you scroll down, and there'll be a list of agents who have gone through our training, who are interested in selling flood insurance in your area. Okay, so it's by your address that you put in. And there's an 800 number there. I've got my card at the back of the room if you guys have specific questions about flood insurance. I'm always happy to help you with it. Or your claims, if you have concerns about your claims. For those of you who have bought policies, yay. And the one thing we really like to point out is that it doesn't matter. And I actually got a call today from somebody down here in Manitou Springs who said, I'm not in a high-risk flood zone, so I can't get flood insurance. Not true. Anybody who's in a participating community can purchase flood insurance. Whether you're in a high-risk flood zone, low-risk flood zone, as long as your community participates in our program and does the things they need to do to mitigate the risk in their community, you can buy a flood policy. So El Paso County participates, Chipita Park participates, you guys can buy flood insurance. So please consider it. For those of you who are in low-risk flood zones, for $250,000 worth of coverage, it's only $458 a year. If you don't have a basement, it's $412. That's great peace of mind. I back up to the Mesa in Golden. I have a flood policy, because guess what? I have a ditch down below me, and they've had some problems in our area. Some of the people in my townhome complex have had flooding in their basement because of the spring runoff. So I have a policy, and I back up to a mountain. Did I ever think I'd do that before I came to this program? No. But I've heard from enough of you who've had claims that I sleep better at night knowing I have that policy. It's great peace of mind. So I think that's all we need to say on that slide. Let's slide forward. So as most of you probably have already known who are here tonight, you're already aware that your homeowner's policy does not cover flood insurance. Some mobile home policies do cover both. So if you have a mobile home, you might want to check for that. Flood insurance is available to homeowners and business owners. Our commercial coverage goes up to $500,000. The maximum amount available for residences is $250,000, and then $100,000 of contents. For the commercial structures, it's $500,000 for contents and building. And you know, like I said, most people who are in this room are probably going to qualify for that low risk policy, our preferred risk policy. So it's $458 a year. Great peace of mind. This picture here is from Durango, just a couple years ago. Did that make the national news? Do you think they had a claim? They did. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what is covered on our policy. Did anybody here, is anybody rebuilding in this community? Probably not, right? That comes up in the Mountain Shadows area a lot. So I'm probably not going to talk about that. But if you've got a building that's under construction, you can get a policy just from the drawings. You know, you can take that into your agent and get coverage immediately. It does cover, a policy covers debris removal. It also covers to have your stuff moved out. So if you have things in your basement and you're concerned about that, you can move that stuff out. We have up to $1,000 for loss avoidance measures as well. So that covers for moving your stuff, sandbagging costs, those kinds of things. And there's no deductible on that. So those are good things to know about. We cover up to 10% of the total policy amount for detached or attached garages. So that means if you had a $250,000 policy, you'd have $25,000 for your garage as well, included in the policy. If you have other separate structures, you need another policy if you want to protect that building. Okay. So contents is additional thing that you need to add on to your policy if you're not buying that preferred risk policy. For our preferred risk policy, it's bundled. So there's different contents amounts built into that preferred risk policy. But everybody else, if you're in a high-risk flood zone, you got to add a little bit on there for your contents coverage and discuss what you want to have covered for your contents with your insurance agent. Okay? I did bring along a whole bunch of the summary of coverages that are back there on the back table. So if you guys have questions about what's covered and what's not on our policy, it's a pretty complete list. The one thing that we do like to point out is we do have limited coverage for basements and the contents in the basement. So if you have a finished basement, if you have contents in your basement, those things aren't going to be covered on our policy. But guess what the two most important things are to have covered on your policy that we do cover? That aren't covered on your homeowners, by the way. Your foundation. Foundation damage is covered on our policy, as is cleanup. That's probably those are your two biggest things that you want protected in your basement. Our policy covers it, most important. And contents covered starts on your first living floor above the basement. So anything, if you've got an area that's below ground, on 4 sides, it's considered a basement. I get questions every year from people. This is I've got a garden level, and their windows start, you know, they're below ground, and their windows start about here, you know. That's a basement. It's below ground on 4 sides, okay? And I want to talk a little bit about actual cash value versus replacement cost value. If you purchase a policy and you think you can just get a policy for $30,000 to cover what you think might be damaged in your basement area, you're actually going to get what they call actual cash value, which is a depreciated value on your structure or the items in your house that are damaged, say your air conditioner, your water, those things will be depreciated based on their use or wear and tear. If you insure your house to at least 80% of its replacement cost value, and that can be different than your appraised value, folks, so that's something you want to discuss with your insurance agent. If you just cover what you insure your house for your other insurance for the same amount for flood, you're probably insured your replacement cost value. That's usually built into your homeowner's policy. And then you get full replacement cost value. If this is a secondary home for you that you're covering, unfortunately, automatically it's actual cash value. There's not replacement cost value on second homes or commercial structures. I'm not sure why they do that, but that's built into our policies. So I like to be upfront about that. Let's go on to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about the definition of a flood on our policy. It doesn't take a whole lot to meet the definition of a flood on our policy. This is what's actually in the policy itself. I have copies of the policy if anybody wants to take them home and sleep well tonight and read that before you go to bed. But it's a general condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry land, or, and for those of you in a more tight-knit community where it's not farm country, this is probably the better definition, or 2 or more properties. So that can be your property, water touching your building, and it touches your street, or the neighbor's property line. So as long as it touches 2 properties, it meets the definition of a flood on our policy rather. And then the key bullet point on there is the overflow of inland or tidal waters. Water flowing over land is the key thing to our policy. So if you guys have, and this doesn't happen as much out here, but it happens more in the Midwest, if you get water bubbling up from the ground up because the ground is just saturated, that doesn't meet the definition of a flood on our policy. But doesn't tend to happen. We get flash flooding here, so we meet that definition pretty easily out here. So let's go on to the next slide. And then I'm at the end, really, just floodsmart.gov. There's the website. There's the 800 number for agent referrals if you have trouble finding anybody. This is the phone number for myself and the FEMA insurance specialist. I'm actually a consultant for FEMA's flood insurance program. I work for a big engineering firm. But either one of us can answer any insurance questions you've got, whether it's for claims or what the policy covers, or I don't know, last year I got a lot of interesting calls from people saying we're just not sure how to insure our property, what's the right way to go, and maybe they weren't as comfortable talking to their agent about it as they were me, but you feel free to call us with those kind of questions. And I think that's it.
So now I'd like to introduce Pat Fitzgerald, and she's from Rocky Mountain Insurance Information Agency. Thanks, Pat.
Hi, I'm Pat, and I'm filling in tonight for John Putnam, who's out of town. A lot of times, you know, when you're first getting a homeowner's policy, you just want to get what the mortgagee is requiring you to carry. And after the events this summer, we saw that, you know, there was a lot of problems with underinsurance and the incorrect perils that were insured. So it's, you know, a good time now to take a look at your insurance policy and some other risk management options. It's worth it, you know, you want to look at, you know, your limits of insurance, make sure, like on a homeowner's policy, as Aaron stated, you need to carry 80% of the replacement cost for the replacement cost provisions to apply. And with, and you also want to, for a little bit of extra money, you can get replacement cost on your contents. And as flood insurance is excluded from the homeowner's policy, and so for that reason, you know, you would definitely need another policy, you know, to cover that peril, as long as other things like earthquake, you know, this is kind of seismically active at times. And as Aaron had stated, the flood insurance policies for a home, the maximum amount of coverage available is $250,000. And there's also valuation issues, like the contents are all valuated by actual cash value, and the you know, there's just some other limitations. You don't have the law and ordinance coverage that's available. You can get an excess flood policy, and you can talk to your agent about that. It's kind of like an umbrella. It will drop down over, you know, what's provided by the flood insurance to broaden the coverage a little bit. And there's several carriers out there that will do that. It's like, you know, you can get it very broad, but it's what you can afford to do. You know, just get some quotes from your agent on maybe some excess flood coverage in addition to what's provided by the underlying NFIP policy. Okay, the basic coverages provided by the homeowner's policy are coverage A, which is dwelling, and then you get additional structures, which is 10% of the coverage A limit for the dwelling, and you can increase that. Then your contents is typically 50% of the coverage A dwelling limit, and that can be increased, and you can also get replacement costs on that. And then the other important one is loss of use, which is in the event of a mandatory evacuation, or like if your home is destroyed, you have expenses related to a temporary residence and you know, anything related to that. And, you know, the criteria. Flood does not include loss of use, so at that point, you can get that on an excess flood policy if you want it. Some of the additional coverages, one of the things they saw, Waldo Canyon, there are some built-in coverages for landscaping and trees on your property, and for a very small amount of premium, you can increase that limit of insurance. And these are additional limits of insurance and not included within the basic coverages. Law and ordinance, it varies from policy to policy. You need to look into that. This is what you need to do to bring your property up to code in connection with, you know, changes in the law and ordinance to make that the county puts forth. So that's all over the place, you know, and check your policy and make sure that you have enough. It's usually an additional amount of insurance, but sometimes it's not. Okay, next slide. Okay, John had asked me to talk a little bit about business insurance. Some of you may own businesses, and this is also a little bit like, you know, a risk management plan similar to what you would personally do. You have the building, the co-insurance clauses are stricter in this. There are ways you can manage that with coverages known as agreed amount and blanket coverage. You know, it's just something you would need to talk to your agent about. With the additional structures, you can build that into your policy. That would include fences, signs, flagpoles, and other outdoor property that would be with your business. And then with your business personal property, you know, that can also be done on a blanket business or a blanket basis over all the buildings that you have. You would also want to consider personal property of others that's in your care while you have possession of it should something happen. And then again, you know, flood insurance is available for businesses as well. And then a very important area, like the loss of use on your homeowner's policy, you can get business interruption insurance, and it includes, you know, additional expenses. You know, once there's a claim, you may need to put a temporary location up. You may want to advertise to notify people that you've moved, you're still open for business, and that's the indirect type of loss that can be really more damaging than the actual physical damage to your property. And so you want to, like, you know, go ahead and change the next slide. Okay, this is review your replacement costs, and periodic reviews should be done during the course of the policies. Maybe you've done an addition or changed or upgraded something, so the value of your policy or of your property has increased during the policy term, and it's a good chance to talk to your agent and say, hey, I've added an addition, I need to increase my building coverage. So you'll be, you know, properly insured in the event of a claim. And do you have, and with the business side of it, if you have any unique property that is going to take a while to replace, maybe you need to get parts from a, you know, from Europe or something, then you would want to consider that in your business income valuation. Itemize, you know, you want to keep an inventory of your contents, because this is kind of a difficult area. You know, once you have a total loss, trying to remember everything that you had in your house. And there's some really good, all right, this website, knowyourstuff.org, it's a way that, you know, you go room to room and you can like inventory it. You have to like set up an account with them, but you can just go ahead and have that available, and then it's saved on the internet. So should you have a claim, you'll already have information on the replacement cost of anything that was in your house at the time. That's really awesome. Take advantage of your insurance agent who has helped you with your plan. He can give you ideas on what to do with your risk management plan and where to go for additional information. Okay, and next slide. This is a really good website for, there's a really good brochure on how to plan for, you know, evacuating your house and, you know, to help, it's a really good plan to help you get out of there in the event of an emergency and a disaster impending. The best protection for you, you know, when you consider risk management, what can you afford? Maybe insurance is not always the solution. You want to look at a large deductible, particularly in homeowners, because if you file a claim, it's likely you'll get canceled down the road. So on a small claim, it's something you want to retain. So maybe a large deductible would be a good idea. And it's just like, at the end of the day, if you have a really bad loss and you are underinsured, it's, you know, if you can afford to do it, that's fine. But a lot of people, like, you know, it's not a good idea to do that. And then, again, the best time to start is now. There's an axiom in the insurance industry. Cost is relative, price is absolute. So consider that with your risk management plan.
And now I'd like to introduce Kristen Henry from Aspen Point.
My name is Kristen Henry. I'm from the Aspen Point Colorado Spirit Waldo Support Team, And we are a group of crisis counselors assembled through Aspen Point to help people who are affected by the fires, as well as the aftermath of the fires. Whether you're still struggling with fears or anxiety, or you know somebody who is, we can sit down and we can talk, as well as we can provide resource referrals. We also, you guys may have seen us in the neighborhoods, we also wear these blue shirts every single day. We wash them now. And we will go door to door and provide information, as well as go to every community meeting we're invited to, so we can provide you with relevant information. So, this is also exciting. We are doing a project in 12 schools within the Colorado Springs area, Woodland Park area, and Cascade, Chipita Park areas. And basically, this project is to empower kids. What we found is that kids are really resilient, which is awesome, but they also get scared and they piece together information when they don't know all of it. So what we're doing is we provide them with a packet, and they have to go home, do a scavenger hunt with their families, do a word search, do a matching game, so they get familiar with packets to put, or items to put in an emergency pack. This also, this also causes people to communicate in their families, to talk about a plan, what to do if there's a flood, what to do if there's a fire, what do you do if your mom or dad's on the other side of town and you're at home alone. It forces people to make a plan, and also causes kids to be a little bit more responsible. The cool thing is that kids are actually putting toys as well as neat flashlights to toilet paper and blankets that they need. It's just something that kids can grab onto in the face of an emergency. A way you can contact us is 572-6100, and that's the main hotline. And we can go to the Ute Pass Library. We can meet with anybody. If you guys know somebody, you can refer them to us as well. And you guys can also email us at waldosupportteam@aspenpoint.org. That's all.
Wow, a lot of information tonight, huh? Information overload. I want to thank all the experts that came out this evening. They will be available to chat with you guys, and I will want to encourage you guys to please chat with them before you leave. I also want to mention that we do have a reverse 911 person here. Again, thank you, Commissioner Clark, for this evening. For all of you guys, we appreciate you, and let's move forward.